Good evening, and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight, we're going to be continuing where we left off last night. And last night we were talking about the single shot, or the single sonic sound that was recorded by Manny S. in the shadow band files up near the church. And thank you for the commenters who responded to my video last night telling me exactly where it was and who recorded it. But anyway, we had an audio which we looked at, and we listened to it, we watched it, we looked at the various aspects of it, and we came up with the conclusion that indeed this sound right there, the one that's larger and more prominent than everything else, is indeed a supersonic crack of unknown origin at the moment in time. And so what we did was we looked at it and we observed that it came in the middle. We identified this volley as being part of volley 7, and we hypothesized that it could either be part of volley, a sound produced by part of the existing bullets, or it could be an additional one. And we'll examine both sides of this story. And we noticed that if it was a alternate gun, that there is no visible corresponding muzzle sound associated with it. And then we showed how to identify this as volley 7 and various other aspects. And then we moved on to Oasis apartments to determine whether or not this sound was something that was local to that recording only. And what we found by looking at the Oasis, I think I still have Oasis up here. Oh yeah, there we go. By looking at the Oasis apartments is that indeed it is a sound which is not unique to the one recording, but occurs in multiple locations across great distances. So here again, at the same time in the volley 7, right just prior to shot 90, we have a fairly large deviation in intensity of the sound. So that means that we have a phenomena which is not local to something at the church area. And from here, what we need to do is identify more and more videos that also recorded to try to get a general feeling of where it's at. But tonight I'm not going to go into that. What I'm going to go into is a different aspect of it, and what I'm going to go into is the methods I use to determine the rough paths of the bullets. And we have to start somewhere. And so the question begins, why did I jump to the Oasis apartments? Well, if you understand the basic gunshot theory, what you have is a scenario that the further you get away from the bullet path, the smaller the times of arrival between the supersonic crack and the muzzle become. So for example, if we have a bullet, and let's just assume it's going from southwest to northeast, because that's the most common scenario. Then I don't even like that to begin with. So let's draw one a little shorter. And if we have a recording like we have at Oasis, that's something like this. And if the gun, or if a round is produced in a supersonic cone, okay, then the question becomes, when do we hear the sounds produced by the muzzle and the supersonic crack? Well, the muzzle comes second and the supersonic crack comes first. And the muzzle is easy. It just goes out in those spheres, and so the time it takes is the direct path, the direct line of sight path from the muzzle to that location. The supersonic crack, on the other hand, does something different. The supersonic crack first travels some distance and then after traveling a bit, the supersonic crack or the wavefront of the cone at that point propagates outwards and arrives at the bullet at an earlier time, because this path in the green there is shorter than, or the sum total of the green path is shorter than the blue path. Now, it doesn't look like it in this graph, but it's always the case. However, the difference in time is very small for locations which have an angle between the bullet trajectory and them that is large, and that's the miss angle, what we call the miss angle. And so as the miss angle increases, by and large the lag also decreases. Now, because of this phenomena, the sounds that get recorded are early in the life of the bullet, and such that any phenomena that occurred downrange, say like it hit something and stopped there, would not be recorded in these sounds. And so I always jump to Oasis Apartments to first look at things so they don't get mixed up and confused with all the phenomena that can happen to bullets, because as you recall in my last in a recent video, I talked about the cone of silence, where after a bullet hits something, there's this region in front of it where there's no more supersonic cracks, and so there's no supersonic cracks recorded. And so by choosing the Oasis apartment, I avoid that phenomena because the sounds come from prior to any strikes. Similarly, if I were to choose a location up at the Excalibur or the Lux or anything along in that region, I probably could avoid the same thing. So that's why I choose here. So for these locations we would expect the lag to be small. Now, in terms of how you want to express it, you can express it as angles, you can express it as distances, you can express it as anything. But if we draw a bullet like that, and then it has this supersonic cone associated with it, and that's a really small supersonic cone indicating a really fast bullet, then we measure the phenomena in one way as downrange distance and cross-range distance. And if we have a recording location over here, then the cross-range distance becomes the distance between the bullet trajectory path and your recording location, so that's cross. And the downrange is, of course, from the muzzle to that cross-range intercept point. So that's downrange and cross-range. And we can express the lag in terms of those things. As the downrange distance increases, lag increases. As the cross-range distance increases, lag decreases. And so there's multiple variables there. Well, fortunately enough, I've measured many lags in this scenario here, and I've created a plot, and the plot looks like this. So you can see that it's not linear in any shape, form, or fashion. But you see generally that as the bullet travels downrange, that the lag increases from small to a little bit larger to a little bit larger to a little bit larger to large right in here. Then it drops back off, and that's because the bullet slows down, and once the bullet slows down, then the regular sounds have more time to catch up to it. But you can also see that in the cross-range distance, i.e. from northwest to southeast, that if you start right along the bullet path, the lags are large, and then as you get further and further away, they become smaller. And it's not linear, or these would be straight lines, or some form of straight line. So if you have a lag, one lag, let's say you have a lag of .02. You drop down here, just look at the colors. .02 would be in the deep colors. A lag of .02 could occur in multiple different locations, and that's what makes understanding the whole thing a little bit difficult. If you had a larger lag like .3, which is designated by, let's go .34, which would be yellow, then anywhere in the yellow that lag could exist. Not anywhere, but there could be multiple locations at which that lag exists. Let's just put it that way. So a lag is not a unique number, but a general indication of a region that the trajectory of the bullet traversed. And obviously in this one, well, maybe not obviously, but since the lags are small here and they get larger that way, that is the direction of travel of the bullet. If the travel of the bullet were in any other direction, then all these yellow and reds and everything would be rotated. And if it were coming from over here, then the blues would be over this way and the yellows would go that way. So it's a pretty good indicator of things. And it's almost as good as measuring the times of arrival like we did for the box plot algorithm, except that it's more qualitative than quantitative. The box plot is really a mix between qualitative and quantitative, because it doesn't get down to the exact number, but it gets down to a region. Okay, so we're going to be talking about lag quite a bit here. So I guess, I have to tell you a little bit about this story of this experience. After I looked at the Oasis Apartments audio, and I determined that the lag was not a local phenomena to the church, but that indeed it was recorded here at the Oasis Apartments, which, from what I just told you, always records the sounds very close from the Oasis Apartments without all the machinations of bullet strikes and things like that. So this indicates that wherever the source was, it was probably close to the Mandalay Bay. And of course, that brings right back to the whole scenario. So I said, okay, great. Well, let's take a look out in some of the other areas of the venue. And so I looked at 10 more videos around the venue and all that sort of stuff, and I wasn't satisfied. I looked at 10 more, and at some point I got up to 40 some, and I said enough. And I had a pretty good picture of what was going on at the time. So now it's the appropriate time to get numerical and to quantify and nail these things down. So, and actually I'm still in the process of analyzing some of them, because what I want to do is create a sort of a reference chart where I take all the videos and I look at their audio and I classify it into some groups. So for example, if you were close to the action where the bullets are striking, I call those under fire, you would see this type of audio where you have massively large sounds coming. There's probably hits recorded here. And sometimes there's strong muzzle and sometimes there's strong sonics, but you got lots of action and it's all kind of chaotic in nature. This is another example where it's under fire, but the sounds are a little bit more subdued. This is an example of a plot that's very common to the audio, which is in the venues south of the sound towers. That is, you'll have some pretty strong muzzles, and then there's this group of 13 to 18 rounds that produce very strong sonic cracks, but the other ones aren't producing very strong sonic cracks at all. And this is the source of the quote-unquote talking guns phenomena. Now, there's only one gun here, and the The reason you don't hear the supersonic cracks on the other sides is well explained in 2 videos I did, in addition to the Cone of Silence video that I recently did. And you can look them up, and I'll put links to them in the description. So, south of the sound towers, you probably are going to see something like this. If you're on the downstream side of the bullet or very close to it, you're going to see things like this. If you're way on the downstream side, then there's another in the venue one. Then you're going to end up with something that's sporadic, which is either like what you see at the church, where there's very few supersonic cracks heard and it's mostly muzzle, or there's a good mixture of both, but they're not consistent from one place to the other. That is, sometimes you'll hear both, sometimes you'll hear one, sometimes you'll hear none, sometimes you'll hear the other. And those mostly occur north of the towers, but not always. Just depends upon where the bullets were going and where your location was. And then we have those that are close to the source. And close to the source is given by very, very intense sounds. Now the top one here is from the taxi, and you can see that at the bottom side, which is the muzzle blast, you have just these absolutely intense sounds. And the 745 was batch 7 number 45, which was an officer cam that was recorded along that path from the fountains to the entrance to Mandalay Bay, and the sounds are just overwhelming there. So in both cases we can get a pretty good idea, based upon the nature of these sounds relative to each other, not video to video, but round to round, that these were indeed close to where the source of the rounds were coming from. So, and what I want to do is get all that done before I do too much more presentation of it. So I'm kind of jumping ahead tonight. I'm jumping ahead to what I started way back when I talked about the talking guns. What I did when I gave my talking guns presentation is came up with a lag graph. And this is the lag graph for Oasis Apartments. And what it shows is lag as a function of time, and the lag in this case goes from 20 milliseconds roughly to 70 milliseconds, let's say. And as I just explained, if the lag gets larger, then the bullet is getting closer to your location. If it gets smaller, then it's getting further away. So here we see that the bullet starts out at a position, and the lag's getting larger, therefore it's getting closer. So as these numbers, or as this graph goes up, that represents bullet paths or trajectories which are getting closer. As they go down, that represents positions that are further away. Now overall there's a pattern here, and that pattern is a dove or a seagull, however you want to look at it. And what that says is that the rifle was generally pointed in a direction, and then it swung further away from the Oasis Apartments, and then it swung back going closer to the Oasis Apartments. Or put in real terms, wherever it started, it swung north, reaching its maximum right around the 50th shot, and then it swung south, coming closer back to the Oasis Apartments. And then you have this little jobber-do over here. Now, a lot of times in data measurements, there's mistakes or bad setups or things like that, things we just call outliers. And when I did the video on this originally, I said, well, that's just an outlier, that's a mistake, I'll go back and correct it. But when I got done looking at 40 videos, and I went to the Taxi, Corey Langdon tape, Corey Langdon, but the Oasis Apartments, and reviewed the lag for this, I found that it was indeed not an error. That what I had actually discovered and didn't know it was this shot, as recorded by the Manny S tape, where the trajectory just went bazonkers, where we had this nice little oscillations up there. All of a sudden, the bullet trajectory went way north, away from the Oasis apartments. And where does the church exist? North of the average path of bullets taken that night. So this is a pretty good confirmation that what we have going on here is a wild-ass trajectory by one round in this entire volley. As to why, we'll have to get into that in a little bit further, a little bit later in the video. So, how close was it? Well, without a lot of calculations, you can't really tell. But if this theory is true, then what we can do is come up with another graph from another location equally as far away from the bullets as Oasis, but on the other side of the venue, i.e. north and west. So that's what I did. I went and I grabbed a video, and for that let's go ahead and point out where it's at on the shooting map. I grabbed this one, which is called Las Vegas shooting southwest corner of Reno Avenue and Las Vegas Boulevard. And we can see here that it is indeed pretty much across the way from the Arco Arena. And it records volleys 6 and 7, and 7 is the one we're interested in. So if I go over and bring that up into the sonic visualizer, here's what it looks like. And let's shrink it down to where we can see everything on one screen here. Okay. So for this audio, you can see these big signs. This is the siren from a cop car. These are the harmonics. That's probably people talking. But what we see is these patterns both in the power spectrogram and in the log frequency of good clear sounds that we can measure. So these aren't real loud in terms of being as loud as, you know, right up front, but they are still pretty clear and distinct. And so why don't we go ahead and listen.
Holy shit. Gunfire down there.
So, you know, everything's pretty clear. It's not extremely loud, but it is clear. And what we can do is take a look, go back to the start of them, and we can look at these and we can see pretty immediately that here we have a supersonic crack followed by a muzzle, another supersonic crack followed by a muzzle, supersonic crack, muzzle, da 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 da, and that the time between them is the lag, and the lag is almost a full round, and a round is about 100 milliseconds. So these are on the order of 80 milliseconds. And as we go along, you know, here's one that's shorter. The lag does change, and many times the supersonic crack, it occurs at the same time as the muzzle, creating a larger spike. But we can still see that they are separate. So the bullet is changing location, producing different lags, which we just discussed. And if we go all the way to the end and look at the one in question, will be right there is where it occurs. In the power spectrogram, you can see that, well, it's nothing real, you know, special compared to the rest of them. So in this case, the sound is not, you know, that prominent, the one of interest anyway. So it's just another round produced by the volley. Okay, well anyway, so you take this and you measure all the first you measure all the times at which the muzzle blasts occur. And let's go back to the beginning. of the round because that's the easiest one to look at. Okay, there they are. You see, those are the muzzle blasts. The green represent muzzle blast, and then you go ahead and mark the same thing, but for the supersonic cracks, and then you run them through a program, and it produces the plot. And lo and behold, what we get is this. Okay. So you'll notice right up the top that they're kind of the inverse of each other, which is what I would expect. Because as you get, well, let's go do some drawings. How about that? Let's do some drawings. If we have a bullet, and it goes along that way, and you have two recording locations, one here and one somewhere else here, then a new bullet trajectory going north like this would get closer to that, and it would get further away from this. Similarly, if you had a bullet trajectory that went south, it's the muzzle swept south, it would be closer to here and further from there. So you see, they are about the mirror image. Now, they're not going to be exact because the distance from the average bullet path to the observer's location is not equal. But had it been equal in all respects, both longitude and latitude, then they would be an exact mirror image. But we do notice that they are kind of, he says mirror images, because as one goes up, the other goes down. As the other goes up, this one goes down. And in particular, if we draw our little dove here, we can see that for the Oasis apartments we get a nice little dove. But up here, it's just the opposite, or it's inverted. Okay, so that means that the path of the bullet was somewhere in between these two. A good confirmation. And if we had a few more of these things, we could nail down the path of the bullet more precisely. But given that that's an extremely long and laborious process, I've yet to undertake it. But we can be qualitatively say that the path of the bullets were between these two locations, and that neither location was likely to be hit by a bullet, but that our thinking and theory is spot on. That is, if the bullet had been going this way, then, and sweeping left and right, then the Oasis apartment down here would experience the same lag all the time, while the southwest corner of Reno and the boulevard would have had a pretty big varying thing. And similarly, if the bullet path was up and down there and varied, you know, each one would have varied in a different way, but equally as similar, like a tick-tock clock. So you know, you can quickly limit it down to which direction or which path it took out of these 6 different positions, or 8 different positions, 4 lines, 8 positions. And then by the intensity of the sound, you can quickly do it, or you can always drop back to my trusty lag plot chart like this and say, well, duh, it's over here. So you see, there's many ways of skinning this cat, and they all lead to the same thing. And that same thing will be that this round, initiated from the Mandalay Bay, traveled in a northeasterly direction, more north than east, and because of that, the church was and because of that, and the fact that the one round was kind of wild, the church recorded it. Now we still have to answer the other question, why the other rounds were not recorded with more prominent supersonic cracks, but we'll first have to determine where the bullets hit and make sure that they are subject to either the cone of silence or some other phenomena. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the cone of silence, it basically occurs when you have a bullet that goes that way, and somewhere along it has this supersonic cone, which is, the cracks, and somewhere along there, it hits the ground, let's say right there, and because of that, there's a region ahead of it where there's no supersonic cracks that are recorded. Now, they're still recorded all along the place where the sound continues to propagate out, but not in the cone of silence. So all these will record supersonic cracks, but there will be very little recorded in regions around there. So that's the cone of silence in rough terms. I did a video recently on it. You can go watch it. All right. So back to our dual pane analysis here. So what we've got is very specific measurements. 95. 2 times 95 for each one, because you have to measure all the muzzles and all the sonics and then plot them times 2, and you come up with some very good numbers. Now inside each one of these, and let's take the Oasis apartments, there are other little things going on that I like to observe with this plot. One of them, so we have, of course, first off we have the dove. Second off, we observe this irregularity, and that's the shot of interest that we've been dealing with. And then third off, we see that the average for this little region is like that, and that it does this nice little oscillations pretty symmetrically about that average, except for the anomaly. And these over here kind of do the same thing, but in a more gross sense than the other ones. Okay, let's erase that. Now, when I first made, well, anyway, yeah, I get confused to what I've already said tonight. All right, so we've nailed down the fact that there is this one round that runs amok, and let's go back and look at the sonic visualizer session for Oasis, and I hope I haven't covered this already. What happened was I recorded this whole video once and it didn't record properly, so I have to come back. So I'm getting a little confused as to what I said in the first video, but let's hit it just in case we didn't. Alright, here we have the Corey Langdon tape, and as we look at these things, you can see that some of them have some lag to them and some don't. So up front we get some pretty good separation between the supersonic crack and the muzzle blast, and this is at a let's set it to 256 window size. Okay, and we see that the muzzle kind of oscillates around. The supersonic crack isn't real in there. It's there, but it has a smaller amplitude than that. And in this case, we're starting out with a lag of about 30 milliseconds. But then if we go along and we look at these, they all kind of look the same. Yeah, okay. Supersonic crack followed by a muzzle blast. Muzzle blast is lower frequency, supersonic crack is higher. Muzzle is more prominent than the supersonic crack. Yeah, well, whoops, what happened here? Okay, here we got, it's almost like, it hit something and produced all these extremely high frequency sounds. So that's something to look at, but it did occur right where a supersonic crack did, and that's pretty typical, although it doesn't have a big enough signature But you see there's 1, 2, 3. 3 regions there. Interesting. So anyway, we want to focus on the other things tonight, which are not that possible hit. I'll go into strikes and all that another time. So anyway, blah 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 blah. And I had some text here, didn't I? Oh yeah, here we go. Pardon me. As we go along and we see this pretty big spike there, you notice that when first time I reviewed this tape, this caught my attention. And I said, is this a different gun or a different orientation of the same gun? But now, given all the other information, you have to look at this carefully. And you can see in the waveform down here that what we actually have is kind of different. Instead of decreasing in sound, in amplitude, it kind of grows up in amplitude first. Most of these go the other way. Oh, that one went up. That's interesting. Yeah, they vary. But anyway, back to the one in question. So at first it goes up, just kind of different, but not too different. But it also has this region in here where the supersonic crack is much, much louder and much more high frequency than the prior ones. Here you see these are pretty small in amplitude compared to this. This is about, 3, 4, 5 times the amplitude. And similarly, the muzzle blasts are also louder. So we've got this one shot, the shot that we're trying to find who its source is and all that, being pretty loud, and right here at the Corey Langdon audio, and also much, much louder than the other ones. And you have to ask yourself, why? Well, I don't really have the answer to that. And all I can theorize at the moment is that maybe this was a higher load. That is, there's more powder in the round. Maybe there was more unburnt powder coming out of the muzzle, but that wouldn't explain why the supersonic crack was louder. A higher load, more powder in the load would explain it. Maybe this is a different type of round. Maybe this is a tracer round. But why would that produce both a louder supersonic crack, which it might because of the different nature surrounding the nose of the slug, and maybe that would also cause, because the muzzle blast is created by the exploding gases. So for that to be louder, you either have to have more unburnt gases going out and blowing up outside the barrel, or you have to have more of them inside that just produce a bigger expanding gases out of the barrel. It could have been caused by a cook-off. Cook-off is where the chamber gets so hot that when the next cartridge slams in, it explodes prior to the firing pin hitting the cartridge. But I'll have to look at that. I'll have to see if cook-offs can generate this type of wave signature. But anyway, the bottom line is that we do have here in the Corey Langdon audio evidence that the sound is loud and much louder than the surrounding rounds. Now, some people might say, well, this is proof positive of a different gun or whatnot, but that's not likely, because this is coming at the same exact interval that all the other rounds come at. And for somebody to synchronize guns down to that level is a state-of-the-art that I've never seen. It's not entirely impossible, but it's very, very, very remote. And if that were true, you'd also see it elsewhere. So I'm just going to throw that out of hand as a nonsensical argument. So what we got is a phenomena here. But anyway, even if it were, it'd still be a gun in the same vicinity as the one creating the volley. So it's not a sniper from a different direction is what I'm saying. It's not a round fired from a different direction. The lag plots show us approximately what the bullet trajectory is, and this and another video show us that the sounds came from this region near the Mandalay Bay, approximately at the same location. And in fact, if you compare all of the video recording locations that record supersonic crack and muzzle for volley 7, you can say that it's precisely the same location as all the other rounds from volley 7. Because if you were to move, say, down to a different elevation, 300 feet or 100 feet, or change the longitude and latitude by 100 feet, that would just stand out like a sore thumb when I plot all of the muzzles for all of the recording locations, and it doesn't. Therefore, they have to be at the same location. So anyway, we're going to have to leave that as a mystery as to exactly the phenomena that caused it. But right now we have the intensity of the sounds here, and in the next video, which I show you, as isolating the source as being the Mandalay Bay. We have the lag plots demonstrating that the trajectory is from the lag plot and the lag graphs showing that the trajectory originated also at the Mandalay Bay and took from the southwest to the northeast, and that all of the lag plots show that there was indeed an errant bullet. That is, the path of that bullet was substantially different from the immediately from the surrounding bullets. So it was a wild bullet, and these things happen. Okay, the other thing to remember, this is also the source of a lot of activity down on the intersection of Mandalay Bay and South Vegas Boulevard, where Brady Cook got shot during approximately the middle of this volley. So a lot of these shots, which we can see here because we're up close and personal, you won't see the supersonic cracks downstream because they hit something, and then you're subject to the cone of silence phenomena. Okay, where does that leave me? Okay, we covered the lag plots, covered the lag graphs, we covered the intensity. What we haven't looked at in depth is the next video, which is one that was recorded on the path leading from the fountains there in front of Mandalay Bay into the Mandalay Bay entrance itself, and it's batch 7, number 45, and it records this, which, as you can see, is pretty consistent all the way across. Pardon me a moment, I gotta take a drink. It records very consistent muzzle blast, and it records fairly prominent supersonic cracks. They're separated in time, and you see that if we go all the way to the end here, what does it record for that one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see it records a little bit of deviation there, some extra sound going on. Nothing out of the ordinary per se, but a little bit louder. So it too recorded a little bit louder one. So everywhere we go, we have a little bit louder than usual, which means that a little bit louder, a lot louder actually, for up there at the church is not out of the question. And we've isolated where the approximate bullet path is, and we've identified the source of the sound, and we've identified why that one shot may be heard more prominently than the others, namely it was wild and traveled in a more northerly direction, therefore the angle was just right to record the supersonic crack. which means that it probably did not hit anything along the way for quite a distance. So that was probably one of the bullets that made it out to at least I would say the Budweiser tent. But I'm going to have to do a lot more analysis on these 40 videos that I have before I can say too much about that. Alright, let me go see how we're doing on length here. What the heck? We're still recording. Yep. I guess it doesn't show the size until I'm done. Well, alright, let's continue on and see. What is it? Looks like we're about 30 or 40 minutes in. Okay, we're doing pretty good. So, let's review where we're at. I've covered the lag plot. That one. Covered the lag graphs. Okay. Showed you, compared the two, yep. And showed you, I think I showed you some of these. How the various things look. Yeah. Told you that there were lots and lots of videos that I reviewed. Still in the process of that. Told you that I don't have the exact path, don't have exactly where that bullet may have hit. Okay. Talked about how cracks are generated, yeah. And I wanted to show, let's see, Oasis, shown that. We've shown the taxi. We've shown this one down by the fountain. Why did I have the Luxor? Oh yeah, let me get back. I want to do that one. We did the southwest corner. Well, no, I don't think we did the southwest corner. That's the Manny one. Oh yeah. Yeah, here we can go. We come along, we have the audio for the southwest corner, and what I do is come along, and for each muzzle I mark them in green. You can see here that the green ones mark each muzzle, and then I do the same thing for the supersonic cracks. Come along and mark them, and then I run them through a little program that gets me that graph. So, and some of them are a little tricky at times, but what you can see here is that, I think I mentioned this, this is one of the few videos where a lot of times the supersonic crack for the next round lines up almost identically with the muzzle blast for the current round. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. 745 Luxor. Oh yeah. By way of looking at these things, well, let me pull up one more, because none of these. Let me pull up the brandy one. This is a recording that's taken on the west side of the venue, I think in one of the Coca-Cola places, but at an elevated position of about, 10 or 20 feet. And I want to show you what Volley 7 looks like in that area of the venue. Okay. Here you have all volley 7 in its entirety, and you notice that here along the bottom there's a lot of muzzle blast, except for this region in the middle where you have very strong supersonic cracks. So strong that many of the muzzles kind of disappear into the background. But where the muzzles are strong, the supersonic cracks are sporadic at best. And where the supersonic cracks are strong, the muzzles are kind of weak. And this is typical of many of the recordings that are south of the sound towers. And this is, I think, as I mentioned, the source of the talking guns phenomena, which actually is not talking guns, but just one gun producing multiple sounds. Okay, that one. And this one, which was recorded in the Luxor parking lot, is an example of how that same round can produce something that looks entirely different. Let's get all of them in here so you can see that there's no hump in the middle. We've got strong muzzles and we have strong sonics for almost the entire thing. But when you start looking close and deep, you'll see that oftentimes there's three little humps for each round. And this is a case where there's some reflection going on from something that starts to confuse it. And when you start getting down into Cop Corner where there's multiple walls involved, you can get up 5 of these things all at once. Let's pick like this one. This is just 3. You see there's supersonic crack followed by a muzzle reflection, followed by a little bitty muzzle reflection, all leading to confusion. If we were to change the window size down a little bit, we'd potentially get greater resolution on the time at which they occurred, but less resolution on the frequency, all the way down to, let's go to 128. Yeah, there you go. So you can see, this is the time at which the supersonic crack occurred. This is the time at which the muzzle blast occurred for that same round, and here's the reflection. And the closer you get to more reflecting surfaces, the more of these things you're going to get. Now, why there wasn't a strong reflection for the supersonic crack is because it's at an elevated position and the reflection angle was just not right to be recorded for this. That is, the reflection for the supersonic crack went somewhere else. Whereas for the muzzle it was right and we got it recorded. So once again, that just shows you how that the recording location can substantially alter what is heard and or what is recorded, and one volley can have a multitude of different sounds. So it's not always the case that for every position you get both the supersonic crack and the muzzle. I tend to focus on the ones that do because they're less confusing, and the closer you get to the center of the venue, the more confusing it gets because of all the the sounds in the background. Some bullets have already hit and therefore you don't get the crack. Some are hitting things and you get those sounds added on top of them. Some are near multiple reflecting surfaces. It just becomes chaotic in nature, and it takes a whole lot more time to decipher. Okay, well, I'm starting to drag on, so let's wrap this one up, and we'll continue this series next with an overview of all these things in much greater detail, because I think it's important for people to understand that this phenomena that one bullet, one round can produce a host of different sound phenomena simply by its recording location and the angle to the bullet trajectory and the angle to the shooter's location and its context to other objects. And so not all recordings have to show the same phenomena. And therefore when you come up with a weird sound, I think it's up to the presenter to examine whether or not it's due to the nature of gunshot acoustics, or whether or not you can bring in some alternate theory that is more probable. Alright, we'll catch you in the next one. Out for the evening.